Good afternoon, brothers and sisters. How are y'all today? So, today's topic is, what is the self? We actually have some other talks before about this, and this is something that I think for Buddhists is something which is part of our practice to investigate, to explore, and to discover and realize. In the Buddha's teaching on the universal characteristics, we have the first, Sabbe Sankara Anicchati. So all conditioned phenomena is impermanent. And then Sabbe Sankara Dukkhati, that all conditioned phenomena is subject to is subject to suffering. And then Sabbe Dhamma Anattati, that all phenomena, all phenomena is no self, or not self, if you will. So Buddhism is one of those religions that is very, very interesting, because the whole world talk about self. The whole world, there's so much emphasis on all forms of self. Self-confidence, self this, self that, me, or myself. In fact, today a friend was just sharing with me that she read an article about self-worth and self-esteem. Maybe we can explore that a bit later. So while we all use the word self, and we not just use the word, but we relate to the self on a daily basis, what exactly is the self? What exactly is the self? So for a start, I want to open up my writing pad, the OneNote, and also to get my writing pad out. And then I want you all to perhaps we can do it. Let me see. Let me open up the page first. What is the self? So, whiteboard. And today I'm going to make my face a bit bigger, and then use half the page. And let me see. Maybe I can just give me a second. A bit left. Okay, good. Okay, just nice. Okay, let's see whether this works. So okay, y'all don't know what I'm doing. I'm actually adjusting on the preview, and then I'm gonna push live. So Let's see whether this is big enough. Whether can you all see the words? What is the self? Yeah. I hope it works. Then I'm going to write on this side. Yeah. This side of the screen. Whatever is on this side. So let me get my pen. So there are two things, two angles I'm going to approach first, very quickly. The first thing is I want you all to think about what we mean by self. Yeah, be it the I or self. Yeah, what does that mean? When we say I this, I that, what are we actually referring to? Exactly what are we referring to? So what is the I or the self? Okay, I want you all to think about it. Then you all can share and I can write down. Then another angle I want to approach is to then write down what the sutra and the commentaries talk about when with reference to the self. Okay, so I'm going to look at the comments and then you all can start speaking. Meanwhile, I will write down the definition that is found in the Buddha's time. Now bear in mind, this definition is not so much what the Buddha taught, but what was a prevalent notion, a prevalent concept of what the self is. Yeah. So it is with reference to this that the Buddha would have conversations, dialogues with those from other schools, the ascetics and Brahmins from the other schools, right? So and from there there are a series of back and forth questions. Yeah, and it is through this discussion that the Buddha then draw the conclusion that, well, it seems like no such a thing exists. So let's see. Okay, Brandon, very good. So a common definition of I or self is body, yeah, and mind. Okay, good. What else? What else do we refer to as self? So do we have any special name for this body or mind? So self is a, Wei Fen wrote, self is a representation of identity. Yeah, Cadell wrote identity. Yeah, so we can say that the I or the self is a form of identity. So how do we define this identity? What is this identity about? May adds in that it's our perception. What else? Let's look at the identity a bit more. In what way do we form an identity? Like when we introduce ourselves, how do we introduce ourselves to others? Ego. Lin Toy says ego. Wow. Ego, let me put. Ego is almost synonymous with self. Yeah. So I'm going to put it inside the balloon, the bubble. Yeah. So Phyllis adds, based on selection, optimization and compensation. Meaning? So Sai Kiang and Siu Yin says we introduce our name to others. Yes. Yeah. So name is a form of identity. Okay. So we have our name. So so the name is a form of our identity. Yeah. So the name is also known as a label, right? Label. So for example, let's say, let's pick one of you as an example. Let's say the first person who replied just now, Brendan. Okay. So just now Brendan wrote, what did he write? Brendan wrote body and mind. Yeah. So Brendan. So let's use Brendan as an example. Did I spell it correctly? Brendan or double N? Hang on. So we use the word Brendan to identify with something, and we can loosely say we identify with the body and the mind, and say that this set of body and mind is Brendan. Agree? Yeah. So in your own case, let's say you are Wei Fen, you are Cadell, you are May, and so on. You would say, this body is Wei Fen, this body is Cadell, this body is May, this body is Lin Toy, and so on. Yeah. And maybe we say, this mind of mine is me. Think about this statement. This mind of mine is me. So if the mind is me, and we say that this mind of mine, or this body of mine, so that means there's a me owning the body. Yeah. But if we say that the body is me, that means the me is the me owns the me. A bit of strangeness there. So which is it? Yeah, think about it. Okay. Is it that the body is me? Yeah. But we usually say this body of mine. Yeah. Or my body. Right. So if body is me, then that means there's something. That means then we cannot say my body. Yeah, because my body means mine is a me owning something. Yeah. So think about this. Is this a linguistic problem? Is this a grammar a problem with the language, or is it a problem with the concept? You know, sometimes the way it's expressed seems problematic, and it's problematic only because of the language, the limitation of the language. Sometimes it's the concept itself that is a limitation, that's a problem, and that's why when it's expressed, it seems a bit queer, a bit odd. Okay, think about that. Sai Kiang adds IC number, haha, two identifiers. So some people, so we may also identify with IC number. Yeah, IC. In Singapore, we have identification card number. Yeah, IC number. So identity card. Identity card is it has a number, unique number that has 7 digit, one letter in front, 7 digit, and then a check character. Yeah. So we have that in Singapore, and it's quite uniquely Singapore. It is also found in Malaysia, but in many countries there's no such a number. Yeah. In many countries there are equivalent numbers. Yeah. So each person has a unique number. So now we have two identifiers, the name and the IC. Yeah. So Dan Tam mentioned emotion, sensory, thoughts. So emotion, sensory, thoughts, these are under the mind. Okay. In Buddhism, emotions is part of the mind, the sensory and thoughts are also expressions of the mind. Although sensory can be due to body also. So sensory, the eye, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind. Yeah. So for the first 5 is body induced, and then the last one is purely mind. But bodily induced, and then if you are talking about sensory sensation, yeah, so sensory feelings, so to speak, then that is actually still mind, but is induced by the body in the first 5 senses. Then we have thoughts, which is our concepts, our ideas in our mind that is formulated over time. And yes, we identify with all this, right? Emotions is varied. Can be happy, can be sad, can be angry, can be joyful. Yeah, a whole range of emotions. And oftentimes we identify with it, and we say, I am angry. Yeah, I am angry. So after that, after after one night, maybe we wake up and we stop being angry. So what happened to that anger? Where did it go to? First question. Second question, and apparently it has disappeared, yeah, or it ceased to exist. So does it mean that part of I disappeared? The angry I disappeared? And if an angry I can disappear, then where did the angry I come from? Yeah, and if the angry I or happy I can appear out of nowhere and disappear into thin air, then what is the I? Yeah. And in that case, then it seems like the I can increase and decrease, yeah, and can change and fluctuate. But is that how we perceive the I? Phyllis, what self-select to be? So this is with reference to what she wrote earlier, based on selection, optimization, and compensation. What self-select to be? Optimize based on expertise and compensation by working with others to maximize each other's potential to achieve a goal. These components add up to a self. Can be interpreted by Sen Kou Yi, or there's no actual self in existence in reality. I pondered about this before and got stuck. Where do you, Phyllis, the question is, so the first part, if I understand your statement correctly, what you are saying is that whatever the self may be is actually a result of a process of, in a way, give and take. Yeah. And what you describe about this process to work with others to maximize each other's potential to reach a goal is a very specific instance. Yeah, because sometimes we don't work with each other, you know. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. Sometimes when we are upset, we work against each other. Yeah, we purposely choose not to work with each other. Yeah, because we don't care about the goal anymore. And maybe that is an expression of self, isn't it? We identify with this self more than the goal as self, or we identify less with the goal than this me is more important. So the goal, I don't care. So I don't want to work with you, I don't want to work with you, even if I think you are right, even if I think your idea is better, but I purposely sabotage it. I don't want to work with you. Sometimes we are like that. So the self can be like that. So in some cases it's an optimization, in some cases may not be. Maybe in some ways it's still an optimization, but optimization to create problem. Yeah. So there's a process. So self can be a result, yeah, from optimization. Okay, let me check whether the words are cut off. Okay, still okay. And then we have, let me just draw a line down so that I don't overshot the space. Okay. So what else? Wiki mentions about achievement, yeah, similar to what was discussed by Phyllis, that there are certain results. Yeah, so achievements is a form of results, and we may identify with the achievement as me. Yeah, so results, achievements. Yeah. So achievement is a bit more interesting in a sense that achievements can be in terms of the mind body, it can be in terms of something else that is generated, that is created, that is done, work done by this body and mind. Like we go to work, we use the body, we use the mind, and then we come up with plans, we carry out activities and so on and so forth, and then we achieve some outcome. Yeah, maybe we come up with a sales plan, maybe we come up with a target, and we achieve the target. Yeah, and sometimes the target is a so-called good target, yeah, that we are proud of, and then we identify with it, and we say, oh, I did this. But sometimes even when it is not a good result, we also identify with it, and we say, yeah, I did this. Yeah, and we feel lousy about ourselves when the thing we identify with is not so good. We feel better when the thing we achieve is better. So far so good. Yeah. Phyllis says, exactly, and dependent on environment, situational. Thank you, Sifu, you are right. So there's no self but only mind. No, that was not my conclusion. Yeah, we haven't drawn any conclusion yet. Yeah, we are merely exploring how we experience self. Yeah, because in order to look at, okay, what is self, we must first look at what do we mean by self. Okay, and in a way today's talk is that, what is the self? Yeah, so we're not drawing any conclusion yet, we are just listing down what everybody have in mind. Lord John writes possessions, traits. So achievement is a form of possession, yeah, in a way. Yeah. And then we have traits. That means qualities, okay, traits, qualities, things about us. Yeah. So we tend to look at qualities, characters, and traits as somewhat unique to that person, a unique combination. But as we grow older, do we find that sometimes people share traits? Yeah, the fact that you can describe it with an English word, it means that that same English word or combination of English words that we call character can perhaps be used to describe another person. Yeah, so even characters are not unique, so to speak. Second says, something that we cling on to with our dear life, afraid of losing it, thinking that when this self comes to an end, everything will be gone. A sentient being with a mind who is not a Buddha yet. Li Hui Ching says that. Okay, let's keep it floating. Okay, so something that we cling on to with our dear life, yeah, we do cling on to the self. But let's work with what we have here. So what we have here is that we look at the self or the I or the ego as body and mind, the combination of many things, including our emotions, senses, and thoughts. Yeah, that we give a name. Yeah, or many times our name is given. Right, someone gave us this name. Yeah, so think about it. The moment we are born, we are not always given a name yet. Yeah, some parents, like way before we are even born, already thought of the name, right? But for some, the child is born but not given a name yet. So sometimes we may if we are close to the family and we ask like, so what's the name? And the parent may like, oh, we haven't thought about it yet. Any suggestion? So the question, before we are officially given a name, what are we? Without the name, what are we? So we are a baby, right? We are a baby. So then at what point do we stop being a baby? When we are given a name, we are still a baby, right? Yeah, we are still a baby. So like in the example of Brandon, when Brandon was a baby, before given a name, he has no name. So we say your baby. So it's with reference to the parents. Yeah. Or this baby is very cute. Then it's just this baby. Then later on, a name is given, Brandon. And then suddenly this baby has a name. But one moment before, no name. One moment later, has a name. So after the name was given, does it make the baby more Brandon or not? And before the baby was given the name Brandon, did it have any Brandonness or not? And if there's no Brandonness to begin with, then why call the baby Brandon? And for that matter, most of you may not know Brandon, yeah, or Sai Kiang or Cadell or Siu Yin or any of, some of you know each other, okay, to be fair. But some of you may just be watching this maybe 3 years later, I don't know, yeah. I mean, now we are recording, right, live. But 3 years later, someone else may watch this. And or maybe 10 years, 20 years later, I don't know whether Facebook will still be around, but sometime later, someone watch this and it's like, Brandon, it's just another name. And maybe there's another Brandon who is watching this video and will be having a good laugh. Yeah. So is there anything unique about the name that makes us that name? Think about it. Seems like no, right? Because anyone can be called Brandon, anyone can be called Sai Kiang. And in fact, while we have the birth name given by our parents usually, yeah, along the way as we grow up, we are also given many other names. Yeah. And initially when we are given new names, sometimes it's nicknames in school, and sometimes it's flattering, sometimes not so flattering. And the funny thing is, when it's flattering, we feel quite happy when people call us that. You know, like I notice when sometimes I'm out with some students, yeah, then at some shops, the store owner would call my male students 帅哥, yeah, or call them 老板, or they will call the female students 美女, right? No, I'm not suggesting that my students are not 帅哥 or not 美女, but it seems as though it was just an expression. Yeah, quite clearly the store owner say that to everybody, but it cannot be true that everybody is 帅哥美女 ma. Or maybe maybe the store owner truly feel that way. So the question is, when the store owner calls 美女, do we really become 美女, even if we are not? Or if the store owner calls something else, does it make us less of a 美女? And similarly for 帅哥, yeah. So does the names define who we are or not? Yeah. Because if we use it to identify about ourselves, then it must have some essence, some link to who we are, right? But yet, if we were to explore deeply, we may find that these names are just temporal, you know, and it's more of a convention that it so happened that our parents call us this, give us this name, and so we are just known by this name, and perhaps the name may reflect our parents' aspiration or that person's opinion about us, or aspired opinion about us. You know, like some parents, they will call their kids like 建国. Yeah, for guys, my generation, quite common name. Yeah, 建国, 国强, you know, and so it's all about the aspiration that the parent have for the child, that may you grow up to become someone who is useful to the nation, you know, things like that. Or like in my generation, a lot of the classmates all May something one or something May, you know. Yeah, it's a very common thing, right? May is like beautiful, so it's like that's how many people name their child, right? But if that is really true, then we should just, you know, that day a student was telling me that she actually go and change her name, you know, because of some fortune telling consideration, that changing the name can influence the fortune. So I told her, I said, if you're going to change your name, you should just change your name to Sakyamuni Buddha. You know, if you truly believe that changing the name can directly influence who you are, then just change to Sakyamuni Buddha lah. Then you will become Buddha ma. But of course we know that it doesn't work, right? Yeah. And for those who like to be the Prime Minister, then you change your name to Lee Kuan Yew, then you become the Prime Minister? No. I'm sure out there's other Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore, but there is only one Lee Kuan Yew who did a fabulous job, you know? Yeah. So what if we are given a different name? Then, so think about that. While we use the name as an identity, the name by itself don't imbue us with certain qualities. Yeah. But having said that, our tendency is we would interpret those words, because those words usually have some meaning, and we will interpret and connect with those meaning, and in turn be influenced by it. And it's because of this influence that it shapes our life. And in that case, then perhaps we should just shape our life in a positive way. So far so good. Yeah, but in that case, does it mean that all these things is what we call the self? And if all these are the self, then why did the Buddha teach no self? Yeah. So when the Buddha gave the teaching on no self, what was he alluding to? What was he trying to point to and guide us towards? What was the point really? Yeah. If there's no self, then who is listening to this talk? Who is giving this talk? Yeah. If there's no self, then who was feeling miserable when you were crying? Who was elated when you score full marks? Who was over the hill when you managed to get the person you love to marry you? Who was the one who was excited when you won 4D? Yeah. Who was terrified in the dark when you were young? Yeah, if there's no self, then who is responsible for all that? So in the Buddhist tradition, in all the different lineages, since the Buddha's time, there has been different approaches to help people understand that. If you look at the Pali Canon, in a way, the Buddha didn't just go around telling people, no self lah, forget about whatever you are doing, you know. Yeah, so much for your self-confidence, self-esteem, self-worth, self-whatever. All this is just your own delusion. The Buddha didn't go around in that way. Instead, what the Buddha did was, first of all, he don't always just jump straight into talking about self or no self. Many times he will address whatever is troubling people, whatever concerns people, whatever preoccupies people. Yeah. So he's a very interesting teacher. He teach according to your standard. He don't have a standard syllabus and he just, shoehorn that whole thing onto you. But rather he assess your current state and think, okay, so what is the best thing you need right now? Yeah, so we see that in different suttas, teach differently according to the level, so to speak, spiritual maturity level of the individuals. To the young kids who were playing in around a pond, prodding and prodding fishes in a pond, he teach them empathy by asking them, if you are the fish and if someone were to throw stones at you, poke you with sticks, how would you feel? And the children realized that, oh, they would feel hurt, they will feel painful and fearful. And then the Buddha told them that in that case, why should you do that to the fish? So to them at that stage, he taught them empathy. And in the process, he didn't bring in no self at all. He didn't bring in impermanence or any of that. He taught them empathy so that they cross over their current situation, which is cruelty. And then to a group of merchants, he teach them generosity. He teach them the precepts. Yeah, because for them as a businessman, their immediate goal is to make money. They are interested in making a living. They are interested in wealth. Yeah, so the Buddha didn't just go in and say, why do you all bother with your businesses? Yeah, in the end, no self. So who is going to be rich? No self. No, the Buddha's approach was never like that. Yeah, it wasn't no self as an end by itself. Pun intended and not intended. But rather, he teach them that if you want to be wealthy, there are legitimate ways to go about. There are righteous ways, proper ways to acquire your wealth. Yeah, and there is the causal karmic basis for that. And so, if you want to have wealth, besides working hard, you must also plant the seeds, which is generosity. So then they earnestly carried that out. And when he observed that they have already nurture their heart, their mind for spiritual growth, then he highlighted to them, you all would want to not limit yourself to the pleasures of the human realm that is acquired through the wealth of your merit. But there's something beyond this. And then the Buddha teach them to observe the precepts. That observing the precepts beyond this life, this mortal life as a human, you can experience something more superior. Yeah, in the heavenly realm, sensual desire and the heavenly realm. And slowly, step by step, he teach them how to move beyond even that. And then he teach them the practice of concentration, meditative practices, samatha. First jhana, second jhana, third jhana, up to fourth jhana, which is as high as the worldly states is concerned. And then beyond that, then the Buddha told them that actually there's something even higher. That's where he alluded to the path beyond, yeah, of enlightenment. And at that point, then the teaching on no self, impermanent suffering and no self comes in. So this is very interesting because today, when we learn the Dharma, oftentimes we just jump straight into a book, and some books may focus just on the teaching on no self. Some talks, like when I teach emptiness, it starts off with emptiness. But you notice that I don't just jump straight into emptiness as an end by itself, because the Buddha's teaching was never intended that way. Yeah, that we teach something just as an end by itself. That is a graduated path. So when the Buddha approached the different people, he teach differently. But when he do teach or broach onto the topic of self or no self, he also don't directly declare no self, end of story, accept and you'll be safe or something. Yeah, but instead he would ask them through questions, yeah, to get people to think for themselves. A lot of self. So the Buddha would ask these pretty standard kind of questions, and he would ask, consider this: is form permanent or impermanent? Yeah. So form, physical form, would include the body. Yeah. Would include what we call the body, right? Let me just highlight this. So we have the body, physical form. It can also be part of the traits, and also our possessions, our achievements. All these can be physical. Then he will ask, is it permanent? And the disciples or whoever he's talking to would think about it, consider, and investigate, and then declare that, oh, it's impermanent. And then the Buddha will ask, is form which is impermanent subject to change? Meaning that, will it change? Something that's permanent, does it change? That means from before until now, it lasts, does it change? Then they reply, yes, it changed. Something that's impermanent is subject to change. And then the Buddha will further ask, is something that's impermanent subject to change, subject to suffering? This part is a bit tricky. I was explaining to another student. So why is it that something that's impermanent subject to change, subject to suffering? There are a lot of teachings that elaborate on this, but if you go to the Pali Canon, it's simply just that 无常故苦，苦故无我. So very minimal explanation. But in some other texts, then in the suttas, in the commentaries, then it explains, because if you examine the change, everything that we have written down today, is there anything that's permanent so far? The only thing we can think of is perhaps the name, and for Singaporeans, the IC. But even this, the IC, is not permanent. Right? After we die, does the IC follow us to the next life? No, right? And our name, we can be given multiple names, so the name can change. And as I mentioned earlier, my student changed her name, so we can change our name. So names are not permanent. But in that case, then how is this impermanence a problem? How is it suffering? So the angle is, think about it. Is any of the changes due to conditions or not due to conditions? And is it due to conditions or not due to conditions? So if we were to observe, we may observe and find that all these changes happen due to conditions. Sometimes we are part of the conditions, sometimes we are not. And all the time it is due to multiple conditions. So all this that we identify with as self changes due to conditions. So what? So it is not simply due to our decision. And how is that suffering? If it's not due to our decision, that means it's not within our control. So if you want it to go a certain way, it may or may not go that way. And simply by definition, something that may or may not go our way is not conducive to happiness. It's conducive towards unease, towards a sense of uncertainty. And all this alludes towards suffering. Not necessarily like just because it's impermanence, then immediately, wow, big deal, suffering. But it's in that direction already. And that is part of the problem, because it is merely in that direction, but may not have enough amplitude to let us recognize it as suffering. And that's why we don't usually recognize it as suffering. We usually don't even recognize that direction until it's too late, until it's significant enough for us to call it, to recognize the change, and then to feel the suffering. Then we say, oh, this is suffering. And by then usually it's too late, because we have already grown that strong identification, that clinging, that attachment. that grasping. And so, by this point, then the Buddha would ask again, is something that is impermanent, subject to change, subject to suffering, fit to be considered mine, me, or myself? Yeah. Is it fit? Does it qualify? Yeah. Something that is always changing, that's not permanent, keep on changing. Today is here, tomorrow not there. Yeah. And the change is not totally due to you, not your decision, how it changes. So in what way is that you? If something goes its own way depending on conditions, then how can we say that this is me? That was the Buddha's question. Now, even in the Buddha's time, there are people who don't necessarily agree, but they don't have a retort to disagree. Yeah, but there are those of his disciples who, when given this train of inquiry, come to the realization, the very thing that we identify with as me, as mine, as myself, as the ego, as the self, as the Atman, the Atta, actually don't really fit. Yeah, it doesn't really gel, and hence no self. So the no self is not simply just as a standalone statement, but it is through a process of inquiry. And that's why in Buddhism, part of the practice is this process of contemplation. That no self is not simply just repeated as a doctrine, as a thesis that we must accept and just regurgitate, but it is actually the conclusion of a reflection and observation. Not just reflection, because reflection is just conceptual. Yeah, but reflection and then observation. That you observe that truly there's nothing that changes independent of conditions. That all these changes is not simply due to your will, so to speak. Yeah. So then what does that leave us? So who is listening to this talk? For the most part, if you look at the whole teaching, as I mentioned earlier, the Buddha referred to individuals as though there's a self. Right? When he referred to Venerable Sariputra, he said, Sariputra. He don't say, these 5 aggregates that is collectively, artificially labeled as Sariputra. He don't go big around, he just conventionally use what is the norm to communicate. So when we learn this teaching, it's not meant to get us to rewrite all our communication. Yeah. Cannot use I. Cannot use you, me, they, she, he. No. We should just continue using that. But to realize that as we use these labels and others use labels on us, these are mere labels, number one. Number two, that all this is describing not a singularity, it's not a single entity that is unchanging and permanent, no. But rather it is the result of multiple sets of conditions. Even what this is the result of multiple conditions. The way we speak, the way we think, the way we feel, the way emotions arise. Yeah, all this, which then brings us back to the earlier question, then what about self-confidence and self-worth? Self-esteem. Because today, in modern world, in Singapore at least, there's a lot of emphasis, especially for young people, emphasis on self-esteem, yeah, self-worth. And over the years, as I sit down and talk to people and counsel them, I realize that sometimes part of the issue they are facing is the sense of self-worth, or the lack of self-worth, yeah, or self-esteem, if you will. So then, let me just turn on the lights, it's getting a bit... So then the question is, should we then abandon all these things that is linked to self, you know? So should we abandon self-esteem, self-worth, self-confidence? But if we do, then how about some parts of the teaching that talk about self-confidence, right? The faith in ourselves, that we can do the practice, that we are able to attain enlightenment. Yeah, 性有能. I just covered it this morning with the Hong Fa Tuan. So, how do we balance this? The truth is, it is just like the first example I gave earlier, where the Buddha, when he gave teachings to the young boys, the concern was to help them overcome whatever they are preoccupied with, yeah, which is harmful for themselves and others. In which case was cruelty. Yeah. So then, what about self-worth, confidence, and so on? There's this teaching on emptiness and no self that I covered some time back in the Heart Sutra, and it's about this simple exercise. And you all may need to we may need to continue another day. But the gist of it is, if we were to write our name, okay, do this exercise, write our name, and ask ourselves, what are we? Yeah, what are we? So we may then put down that we are a man or woman, we are the son, and in my case, I'm a monk. Yeah, I'm a friend, I'm a shifu, I'm also a student. Shifu is also akin to a teacher, and so on, right? So, in a way, we can say that who we are, we can write in the center also, who am I? Yeah. The so-called conventional self is a collection of all this, apart from which there's no Chuan Guan to talk about. And for that matter, my original ordination name wasn't Chuan Guan. Chuan Guan was actually the mentorship name that was given to me. Yeah. So who are we? It's a collection of all these different roles that we play. Yeah, all these roles. But as we go through life, sometimes there are some roles that we hold on to stronger than the other, and as a result, we may ignore some other roles. And through the years, as I sit down and talk to many different individuals, I realize that whenever we overly focus on one role than the other roles that are present in our life, we have a tendency to then cause an imbalance, and as a result, we may neglect certain roles. On top of that, because the roles are always changing, we may also forget that the roles is not a permanent thing. So imagine if a person, like let's say someone who is not me, okay? Maybe it's not a monk and not a teacher and sifu, yeah? So maybe this person is an engineer. And this person is husband also, right? So, but if this person as an engineer focus 90% of his life, of his waking moments on being an engineer, then what happened to all the other roles? It's going to suffer, isn't it? Yeah. And then one day, if the company say, okay, we are downsizing, we are having because of COVID-19, we don't need so many engineers. So we are going to have you talk to HR and then figure out something for you. If a person's life has been defined 90% as an engineer and suddenly that is taken away, I think such a person will have a breakdown. Yeah, because suddenly that self, that sense of who am I is suddenly taken away. Yeah. So this comes from two parts. One is a sense of imbalance, where although there are so many roles, but all our focus and energy and effort is channeled to just one. So you take that away, boom, you collapse. Number one. Number two, not recognizing that all these roles in turn depend on other conditions. And so all these roles are constantly in a state of flux. We are surprised, we are shocked, we collapse only because we cannot accept that can change. If instead we know that it is always changing, if your company comes along and say, okay, we're going to downsize and so we need to relook at your role, we're ready, it's okay. But you may say, Sifu, easier said than done, right? Yeah, easier said than done. That's why you must start doing it now. Don't wait until there's a crisis. Don't wait until, something happened to the company. Don't wait until COVID-19. Don't wait until the next big thing, then you start to rethink your life. Don't wait until you are retrenched. And because this is the very nature of our existence. Yeah, anicca. And this anicca, this impermanence, is about change due to conditions, not due to our whims and fancy. So, if we can do that, I think we would learn to relate to the self better. To see that the self is an artificial identification that we can still use as a convenient tool, and not be hampered by it. Just as the Buddha would refer to his disciples, Sariputra, Venerable, and Moggallana, from Buddha's point of view, he would just refer to them, but not be confined by it. Yeah, and not suffer over them. So, what is the self? Yeah. Think about it. Yeah. In Buddhism, it's more important to consider the question and explore and verify yourself. Yeah, because Sifu can just tell you, oh, there's no self, right? But more important for us to discover that yourself. Amitabha. Okay, we'll end now, because we have exceeded time already. This topic is something that there's just so much we can cover. And just as a closing, again back to the question of self-worth and self-value, linked to what I said just now about this identification. Yeah. Our worth and value in this world it shouldn't be measured simply by our work. Yeah, shouldn't just be that. And oftentimes our self-worth is really the product of our perception of our worth. But the real worth and value that we bring to this world it should be left to the testimony from people who have encountered us. Let them have their say. We shouldn't pass the sentence on ourselves so quickly. Yeah. Let others tell us what our presence have meant to them before we write off ourselves. 阿弥陀佛。愿消三障诸烦恼，愿得智慧真明了。普愿罪障悉消除，世世常行菩萨道。阿弥陀佛。起立。